The Unexpected Encounter. Alexander Cole adjusted his tie as he entered the grand ballroom of the Rothwell Museum. Tonight's charity art auction was the social event of the season, gathering the city's elite to bid on exclusive pieces while supporting arts education. As the founder of Cole Sustainable Architecture, Alexander had made a name for himself designing environmentally conscious buildings that were both beautiful and functional. "Alexander, so glad you could make it," called Miranda Phillips, the museum's director, approaching with champagne flutes in hand. "Your donation for the children's art program is incredibly generous." He accepted the drink with a warm smile. "It's a cause close to my heart. My mother was an art teacher. She'd be thrilled to see what you're doing here." The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers reflecting off jewels and designer gowns. Alexander navigated through clusters of people, exchanging pleasantries while admiring the artwork displayed for auction. His newest project, a community cultural center built from reclaimed materials, had just won a prestigious architectural award, and congratulations followed him around the room. As he paused before a striking abstract painting, the soft murmur of conversation around him suddenly shifted. A subtle ripple of whispers spread across the room. Alexander turned, curious about the commotion, and felt his heart stutter in his chest. Eliza Wright had entered the ballroom. 5 years had passed since he'd last seen her, but Alexander would have recognized her anywhere. Her dark hair was shorter now, elegantly framing her face in soft waves. She wore a deep emerald gown that caught the light as she moved, and her smile, that same captivating smile, brightened as she greeted acquaintances. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood Victor Kwan, the tech magnate whose innovations in artificial intelligence had revolutionized multiple industries and earned him billions. His presence commanded attention, his tailored suit and confident stance marking him as a man accustomed to power. Alexander's grip tightened around his champagne flute. Eliza had been the love of his life before their careers had pulled them in different directions. Their separation had been amicable, but devastating. They'd both recognized the impossibility of sustaining their relationship with her museum residency in Paris and his growing firm demanding his presence in the States. "Are you bidding on this piece?" asked a voice beside him, breaking Alexander's trance. He turned to find Julian Mercer, a longtime client and friend. "I'm afraid I was lost in thought," Alexander admitted. "Understandable," Julian replied, following Alexander's previous gaze. Quite the entrance those two made. Victor Kwan's been making waves with his tech philanthropy, and Eliza Wright's curation of emerging artists has put the Eastwood Gallery on the map. Alexander nodded, trying to appear casual. "Eliza and I knew each other years ago." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, you might want to prepare yourself. They're heading this way." Before Alexander could respond, Eliza had spotted him. He watched as recognition flashed across her face. Surprise, hesitation, and something else he couldn't quite identify. She whispered something to Victor, who nodded, and then they were approaching. "Alexander," Eliza said, her voice just as melodic as he remembered. "What a surprise to see you here." "Eliza," he managed, finding his composure. "It's been a long time." Victor extended his hand. "Victor Kwan, are you the Alexander Cole? The architect who designed that remarkable floating pavilion in Singapore?" As Alexander shook Victor's hand, his eyes met Eliza's. Behind her poised exterior, he glimpsed the same storm of emotions he felt churning inside himself. The years had changed them both, but some connections remained undiminished by time. "Yes, that's me," Alexander replied, turning his attention back to Victor. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Your work with neural interface technology is fascinating." As the conversation flowed around art and innovation, Alexander couldn't help but notice how Eliza's fingers lightly brushed against the stem of her glass, a nervous habit she'd always had. The evening stretched before them, filled with possibilities and the shadows of their shared past. Beneath the surface, the auction progressed with the elegant efficiency of well-orchestrated wealth. Paddles rose and fell as masterpieces found new homes among the elite. Alexander maintained his composure, but his mind kept drifting to Eliza, seated 3 rows ahead beside Victor. She was poised as ever, her back straight, her attention seemingly fixed on the auctioneer. Yet twice now he'd caught her glancing back at him. "Sold for $1.2 million to bidder number 43. announced the auctioneer, his gavel striking with finality. During the intermission, Alexander found himself at the bar, ordering a Scotch neat, when a familiar perfume, jasmine with hints of vanilla, caught his attention before her voice did. "You still drink Scotch, I see," Eliza said, sliding onto the bar stool beside him. "Some things never change." Alexander turned, taking in her features up close for the first time in years. Fine lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes, adding character rather than diminishing her beauty. "And you still wear Karen nocturnes?" Her lips curved into a surprised smile. "You remember?" "Some things are impossible to forget," he replied, then immediately wondered if he'd said too much. "Victor seems impressive." Eliza's gaze drifted across the room to where Victor was engaged in animated conversation with several board members. "He is. Brilliant mind, generous spirit. He's funding an entire wing at the Eastwood devoted to digital artists from underrepresented communities." "That sounds exactly like something you'd be passionate about." "It is," she confirmed, then hesitated. "I saw your Singapore pavilion last year during an exhibition. It was breathtaking, Alex. The way it seemed to float above the water while actually being carbon negative. Pure genius." The use of his nickname, Alex, sent an unexpected warmth through him. "Thank you." It was challenging, but worth every sleepless night. He paused. "How was Paris?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken history. Paris had been the beginning of their end. "Life-changing," she said quietly. "Difficult at first. I almost came back 3 months in." Her eyes met his directly. "Did you know that?" Alexander felt his chest tighten. "No, I didn't." "I called your office, but your assistant said you were in Tokyo for that sustainable skyscraper project. She trailed off, fidgeting with her bracelet. "I took it as a sign we were on different paths." "Eliza, if I had known—" "It doesn't matter now," she interrupted gently. "We both built the lives we were meant to have." A subtle throat clearing interrupted them. Victor approached with 2 champagne flutes. "I thought you might be thirsty," he said to Eliza, his eyes revealing curiosity about the man she was speaking with. "Victor, this is Alexander Cole. We knew each other in—" "College," Alexander finished smoothly, noticing her hesitation. "Architecture and art history seminars often overlapped." Victor's eyebrow arched slightly. "I see. Well, any friend of Eliza's is someone worth knowing. Are you participating in the auction tonight, Alexander?" "I've got my eye on a piece," Alexander replied, though in truth, he'd barely registered the art since seeing Eliza. "But I'm more interested in supporting the cause than acquiring more for my walls." "A commendable attitude." Victor nodded. "We should continue this conversation later. The second half is about to begin, and I'm determined to acquire the Miyazaki installation for Eliza's next exhibition." As Victor guided Eliza back toward their seats, she glanced over her shoulder at Alexander. The look lasted only seconds, but conveyed volumes. There were currents beneath their polite exchange, undercurrents of what might have been. When Alexander returned to his seat, he found a small folded note placed on his program. Opening it, he recognized Eliza's elegant handwriting immediately. "Midnight. The garden terrace. We should talk properly." He slipped the note into his pocket, his heart racing with anticipation and trepidation. Whatever lay between them, resolved or unresolved, would no longer remain buried beneath years of silence. Crossed paths. The week following the auction unfolded in a blur of meetings and deadlines for Alexander, but thoughts of Eliza persisted. Their midnight conversation on the terrace had been brief, interrupted by a museum staff member, but long enough for them to agree to meet again at the Hansen Foundation's charity dinner, where both would be attending. The Hansen event was more intimate than the auction, hosting only 100 guests in the conservatory of the Botanical Gardens. Glass walls and ceiling revealed the night sky above, while strategic lighting illuminated exotic plants surrounding the dinner tables. Alexander arrived early, exchanging pleasantries with colleagues while scanning the room. He spotted her immediately, Eliza in a midnight blue gown that complemented the setting perfectly. Victor stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her lower back as they spoke with the Foundation's director. "They make quite the power couple," remarked Camille Winters, sliding up beside Alexander with practiced grace. Camille, a renowned interior designer who often collaborated with his firm, had been dropping hints about her interest in Alexander for months. "Though I must say she keeps looking toward the entrance. Expecting someone?" Alexander took a sip of his champagne. "You're unusually observant tonight, Camille." "Only when something interests me," she replied with a knowing smile. "And the way you've been watching her since you arrived is definitely interesting." Before Alexander could respond, dinner was announced. To his surprise, the seating arrangement placed him directly across from Eliza and Victor, with Camille beside him. The universe seemed determined to create this confrontation. "Mr. Cole," Victor said as servers poured wine, "I've been reading about your approach to urban renewal. Your philosophy of preserving community while modernizing infrastructure is fascinating." "Thank you," Alexander replied, genuinely pleased by the recognition. "It's about finding balance between progress and preservation." "Balance is essential in all things," Eliza interjected, her eyes meeting Alexander's briefly. "Indeed," Victor agreed. "Which reminds me, Eliza mentioned you two were more than classmates. She tells me you were quite close once." Alexander felt the table's attention shift to him. Eliza's expression remained composed, but he noticed her fingers tighten around her water glass. "We were," he acknowledged simply. "Life took us in different directions." "Such is often the way," Victor nodded sagely. "Though I've always believed people come back into our lives for a reason." Camille, sensing tension, smoothly changed the subject to the Foundation's recent initiatives, allowing conversation to flow more generally around the table. Throughout dinner, Alexander caught Eliza watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. As dessert was being served, Victor excused himself to take what appeared to be an important call. The moment he left, Camille also stood. "I should say hello to the Richardsons before they leave," she murmured, leaving Alexander and Eliza momentarily alone. "Is he aware of our history?" Alexander asked quietly. Eliza traced the rim of her wine glass. "I told him we dated in college. I didn't elaborate on the 3 years after, or the plans we'd made." "Why not?" "Because it still hurts," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Alex, seeing you again has been unsettling." Before he could respond, Victor returned, his expression apologetic. "I'm afraid I need to leave. Crisis at our Singapore office." "Eliza, would you mind if I sent the car back for you later?" "Of course not," she assured him. "Go handle what needs handling." Victor kissed her cheek, nodded to Alexander, and departed with the efficiency of a man accustomed to crises and their resolution. As the evening progressed, Alexander found himself alone with Eliza in the garden, away from the remaining guests. Moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling, casting silver light across exotic flowers. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't gone to Paris?" he asked suddenly. Eliza's gaze remained fixed on a blooming night orchid. "Only on the days that end in I," she whispered. The admission hung between them like fragile crystal, beautiful and dangerous. Alexander stepped closer, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her perfume. "And what about Victor?" Eliza turned to face him fully. "Victor is everything I should want. Kind, brilliant, supportive of my work. But he's not you," she said simply, the words falling from her lips like a confession. Midnight confessions. The botanical garden had emptied of guests, leaving only staff clearing tables and the soft ambient music fading as systems powered down. Alexander and Eliza found themselves in a secluded section of the conservatory where giant Amazonian lilies floated in a small pond, their white petals luminescent under the moonlight. "We shouldn't be having this conversation," Eliza said, though she made no move to leave. Her fingers traced the railing separating visitors from the water. "It's not fair to Victor." Alexander maintained a respectful distance, though everything in him wanted to close the gap between them. "You're right, but I think we owe ourselves closure at the very least." Eliza gave a soft, sad laugh. "Is that what you want? Closure?" The question hung between them, weighted with implication. Alexander chose his words carefully. "What I want and what's possible might be two different things." A silence fell, broken only by the distant sound of water circulating through the pond's filtration system. Finally, Eliza spoke, her voice soft but clear. I tried to forget you, Alex. I threw myself into my work in Paris. I dated charming Frenchmen who spoke about art and philosophy. I told myself I had made the right choice following my career. She turned to face him fully. But there were nights I'd wake up reaching for you. Alexander felt his chest tighten. The Tokyo project was hell without you. I'd see something beautiful and instinctively turn to point it out to you, only to remember you weren't there. Why didn't you call? Pride, maybe, or fear. You were building your dream career. Who was I to pull you back? He stepped closer, unable to help himself. When I saw you at the auction with Victor, it felt like being punched in the chest. Like losing you all over again. Eliza's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Victor found me at my lowest point. The Eastwood Gallery job had fallen through. Funding was cut for my Paris position, and I was considering moving back to the States with my tail between my legs. He believed in my vision when nobody else would. And now, do you love him? The question was unfair and Alexander knew it, but he couldn't stop himself from asking. I care for him deeply, Eliza said, carefully measuring her words. He's been nothing but good to me. That's not what I asked. I know, she whispered, looking away. I don't think I can answer that without hurting someone. Alexander nodded, understanding the complexity of her position. For what it's worth, I never stopped loving you, Eliza. I tried. God knows I tried. The confession hung in the air between them, irretrievable and raw. Eliza closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing the impact of his words. You can't just say things like that, she said, but there was no anger in her voice, only a fragile vulnerability. I know, I'm sorry, but seeing you again, I couldn't not tell you. A security guard appeared at the far end of the pathway, making his rounds. Excuse me, he called. The gardens are closing in 15 minutes. Eliza nodded an acknowledgement, then turned back to Alexander. We should go. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow? Just to talk, he added quickly. There's so much more to say, and this isn't the place. She hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. Victor is flying back tomorrow evening. The night after, then. Another pause, longer this time. There's a small Italian place on Westfield Street. Alfredo's, 8 o'clock. Relief washed over him. I'll be there. As they walked toward the exit, their hands brushed accidentally. The brief contact sent electricity through Alexander's arm, a reminder of the chemistry that had always existed between them. Outside, separate cars waited to take them to separate lives, but something had shifted tonight. A door long closed had opened just enough to let in a sliver of possibility. Good night, Alex, Eliza said softly as her driver opened the car door. Good night, Eliza, he replied, watching as she disappeared into the back seat. As his own car pulled away from the curb, Alexander wondered if he was being selfish. Victor was, by all accounts, a good man who had been there for Eliza when Alexander wasn't. Yet the thought of walking away from this second chance felt impossible. Tomorrow would bring clarity or perhaps more complications. Either way, Alexander knew with certainty that the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart had crumbled completely, leaving him vulnerable once again to the only woman who had ever truly known him. New Beginnings Alfredo's was exactly the kind of intimate restaurant where conversations could unfold without interruption. Low lighting, well-spaced tables, and staff trained in the art of discretion. Alexander arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered privacy without feeling isolated. His fingers drummed nervously on the white tablecloth as he watched the door. At precisely 8 o'clock, Eliza entered, her casual elegance drawing appreciative glances. She wore a simple black dress with a single strand of pearls, understated yet sophisticated. Alexander stood as she approached, his heart racing with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. You came, he said, unable to keep the relief from his voice. I almost didn't, she admitted as she took her seat. But we've left too much unsaid for too long. The waiter appeared with menus, but neither showed much interest in food. After ordering wine, they faced each other across the table, the weight of their shared history and uncertain future hanging between them. How did you leave things with Victor? Alexander asked finally. Eliza's fingers fidgeted with her napkin. We talked. For hours, actually. He knew something had changed the moment I returned from the charity dinner. She met Alexander's gaze directly. Victor is more perceptive than most people realize. He asked about you, about us. I told him everything. Alexander exhaled slowly. Everything? That we were together for 3 years. That we had planned a future. That seeing you again had complicated things. And how did he take it? With more grace than I deserved, Eliza said quietly. He said he'd always sensed there was someone in my past I hadn't fully let go of. He asked if I needed time to sort through my feelings. She paused, taking a sip of wine. He's flying to Berlin tonight for a conference. When he returns next week, we'll talk again. Alexander processed this information carefully, aware of the responsibility it placed on both of them. I don't want to be the reason for anyone's pain, Eliza, including yours. Pain is sometimes unavoidable, she replied. The question is whether what follows is worth it. The conversation paused as their appetizers arrived. For a few moments they ate in silence, the reality of their situation settling around them. If I hadn't seen you at the auction, Eliza said suddenly, I would have continued with my life. Victor would have proposed next month during our trip to Kyoto. He's had the ring for weeks, though he doesn't know I know. I probably would have said yes. Her eyes met his. But now everything feels disrupted. Like the universe threw us back together to finish what we started. Or to start something new, Alexander suggested. We're not the same people we were 5 years ago. No, we're not, she agreed. You've built an incredible firm. Your work is changing how people think about sustainable architecture. And I've found my voice as a curator, championing artists who might otherwise be overlooked. She reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching his. Maybe we needed that time apart to become the people we are now. The contact, simple as it was, sent warmth through Alexander's entire body. Where does that leave us? I don't know, Eliza admitted. But I do know I can't simply walk away from this, from you, without exploring what might be possible. What are you saying exactly? She took a deep breath. I'm saying I need time. To untangle my life properly. To give Victor the respect he deserves. And then, she squeezed his hand gently. Then perhaps we can see where this leads. Alexander turned his palm upward, entwining their fingers. I've waited 5 years. I can wait a little longer. Their main courses arrived, but food seemed secondary to the conversation flowing between them. They spoke of the years apart, filling in gaps, sharing triumphs and disappointments. As the evening progressed, the awkwardness melted away, replaced by the familiar comfort they had once shared. Later, as they walked together along the riverwalk, the city lights reflecting on the water, Alexander felt a sense of rightness he had missed for too long. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, weathered sketch, a drawing Eliza had made years ago of a modernist house perched on a cliffside. You left this behind. I've kept it all this time. Eliza took the sketch, her fingers trembling slightly. Our dream house, she whispered. You kept it. I built it, Alexander said quietly. 2 years ago on that plot of land we found north of the city. It's exactly as we planned, sustainable, beautiful, overlooking the ocean. I told myself it was just a project, but it was always our home, she finished, tears forming in her eyes. They stopped walking, facing each other beneath the soft glow of a street lamp. Alexander gently brushed a tear from her cheek. Whatever happens next, he said softly, know that I never stop believing in what we could be. Eliza stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his chest. Show me, she whispered. Show me our house. The decision hung in the air between them, not just about seeing a house, but about taking the first step toward a new beginning. Alexander covered her hand with his own, feeling her heartbeat synchronize with his. Are you sure? Instead of answering, Eliza rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, before deepening with the weight of 5 years of separation. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the answer was clear in her eyes. Take me home. Alex, she said simply. As they walked hand in hand toward his car, Alexander felt the pieces of his life shifting into place. The future remained uncertain, complex with obligations and decisions yet to be made. But tonight, at least, they had found their way back to each other, and perhaps in the end that was enough of a beginning.